Hello, and welcome to another episode of Pages from Apache County History with Dolly Patterson. Today I'm going to touch just a little bit on the history of Greer, Arizona. Greer holds a special place in my heart, and it always will. It's the place where I got engaged. I spent my wedding weekend in Greer, and many anniversaries and wonderful time in the summer at Greer. My children have enjoyed the lakes, river, forests, and the beautiful, beautiful area of Greer. And my grandchildren continue to enjoy this area today. So I hope you will enjoy learning just a little bit about the history of Greer, Arizona.
Greer, first known as Lee Valley, was settled largely by Mormon settlers. At an elevation of 8,356 feet, Greer is the highest town in Arizona and the fifth highest in the entire country. Because of its high altitude, the winters often proved too severe for man and beast, so many early settlers would return to Round Valley or New Trioso for the winters. Amberian Engelson was probably the first in the valley to build a little place, raise a ground crop, and try threshing, which he did by getting his horses to tramp the grain on a hardened floor of a corral. What is known as Amberian Point in the Greer Valley was named for him. Other early settlers included James Hale, Heber Dalton, Peter Jens Jensen, Lehi Smithson, the Lunds, DeWitts, McDaniels, Howells, Hobson, Halls, Burks, Bigelows, and others. Willard Lee and his family settled there in 1879. A small community named Lee Valley gradually developed. Later, the post office requested a shorter name, so it was changed to Greer, after Americus Vespucius Greer, or A.V. Greer as he was known, a town planner who had recently moved to the area. Ellis Whitney Wiltbank and his family moved to Lee Valley in 1892, where he and John Black had been running a water-powered sawmill for some time. It was the first of several sawmills that would run in the Greer area. Another was a water-powered shingle mill built by J. W. Butler. The early residents of Greer subsisted almost entirely on wild game and fish, and raising oats and barley, potatoes, rutabagas, and other garden vegetables. They had a few head of range cattle, farm animals, and the all-important wagons and teams for hauling grain, homemade butter and cheese to market in the fall as well. Other occupations for early settlers were at the lumber and shingle mills, on road projects, freighting, and on irrigation and reservoir projects. The Greer Lakes, Bunch, Tunnel, and River Reservoirs were created before the turn of the century as reservoirs for Round Valley. In 1851, route surveys that would extend the railroad tracks from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast were first made near Greer. Taking advantage of the railroad's expansion, the Aztec Land and Cattle Company, known then as the Hash Knife Outfit, shipped between 20,000 and 60,000 head of cattle into Holbrook. The animals eventually ranged as far south as Lee Valley without fences to contain them. Two other big cattle operations in the area were the 24 and another one run by A.V. Greer around 1879. The arrival of sheepmen in 1881 created new range wars in Apache County, which continued through the early days of the Forest Service. With the creation of the U.S. Forest Service in early 1900, cattle grazing, timbering, and land water rights became restricted. Greer's cattle population was grazed under the Greer allotment. Roughly 90% of Greer is national forest, making it one of the most beautiful, unspoiled natural habitats that can be found in Arizona. It is also part of the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. The first school in Greer was a 3-month summer school in 1897-98, taught by Emma Coleman. The teacher lived in a room on the back of the school. In November of 1900, the Greer schoolhouse burned. While it was still smoldering, or so the story goes, E.W. Wiltbank called the men together to build another one, which they started the next day. Greer had a school until 1957. The nearby Molly Butler Lodge opened in 1910 and is the oldest continually operating lodge in the state. At the time it was constructed, Arizona hadn't even achieved statehood yet. I always like to look for and share the untold or lesser-known stories, so I'm going to include a couple of those here. The first one is about Hoyer Campground just outside of Greer, located across the highway from the turnoff to the Greer Lakes and just before the turnoff to the North Woods and Big Lake. It was originally called the Greer Lakes Campground, an early Forest Service campground that had been set up for the visitors who were beginning to come to the Greer area. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a forest ranger by the name of Rolf C. Hoyer. He had previously worked for the Coconino National Forest in Arizona and the Lincoln National Forest in New Mexico before being assigned to the Apache National Forest. In 1962, he was named as the Forest Fire Chief for the Apache National Forest, replacing Kenneth Saline, who had been killed in an airplane accident while on fire patrol. In 1967, there were a number of forest fires burning around the state, including one on the Apache National Forest in eastern Arizona and western New Mexico. There were 375 men fighting the lightning-caused fire, including Hoyer. Unfortunately, he got cut off and trapped and received severe burns and smoke inhalation and later died at the hospital in Springerville. In 1968, the campground was dedicated and renamed in honor of Rolf Hoyer for his 11 years of Forest Service and his death in the line of duty. Hoyer Campground remains a popular camping site in the Greer area. The second little story that I want to highlight is about Butler, which is a Presbyterian summer camp in the Greer area. In 1926, a Presbyterian summer conference was held in Oracle Junction. The group traveled to various sites around Arizona for summer conferences, but they decided that a need existed to establish a permanent summer conference and campground. In 1929, they held their first summer conference in Greer at the Butler Lodge. They were convinced that this was the place for their permanent camp. In 1930, the U.S. Forest Service was contacted and a long-term lease was signed for 20 acres of land in the canyon south of Greer. However, over the years, the lease has dropped from 20 acres to the current lease of 13. The Forest Service had to cut a road from Greer to the campsite, which is the East Fork Road that exists today. All the trees cut down from the road construction were piled at Butler to use for the construction of the first main lodge. In the fall of 1930, before the snow fell, volunteers had constructed the walls, rafters, and framework for the roof of the lodge by standing the logs on end. The builders were living in tents and left Butler just ahead of the first snow. Volunteer builders came back again in March of 1931. Because Highway 60 was not completed yet, the party and its load of supplies traveled to McNary over the one-way road through White River to get to Butler. This hardy group of founders worked long hours to get the lodge completed, and on June 21, 1931, the first conference in the new facility was held. During World War II, the camp was closed down and largely neglected for 4 years. When people returned to Butler, they found it to be a rat-infested mess full of debris, and they thought about abandoning the property entirely. But a group of people believed in the beauty and legacy of Butler, so the cleanup began. In 1960, the original lodge was torn down, and the new lodge was built around the original fireplace. It continues operating as a summer camp ministry for all to find and grow their faith. Butler provides a safe and memorable Christian camping experience for children and youth in Arizona and teaches leadership skills for our future leaders.
There are so many more people and stories that could be shared that have played a role in the history of this beautiful area of our county in Greer, Arizona. But time will not allow, maybe in a future episode. Some of the photos were obviously used as filler. I hope you enjoyed them anyway. I didn't have enough photos that I would have liked of some of the locations and people. And we hope you join us again next time for another page from Apache County History.